Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grad Chat by PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school beyond academic research that may be more difficult to talk about in our day-to-day. I'm your host, Niba, and I'm recording this on Ramaytush Ohlone land, also known as San Francisco, California. If you missed it, we are now pre-recording episodes before release. So all episodes are still available via video on the PhD Balance YouTube channel and via audio on all major streaming platforms. Please don't forget to subscribe on your chosen platform to get notifications about new episodes. Today, we'll be talking about tackling academic mental health, and I am really excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Zoë Ayres. After spending several years in academia post-PhD, she moved to industry and is now an analytical senior scientist in the water industry. She's also a mental health advocate in her spare time, working towards improving mental health in research settings, primarily focusing on academic mental health. She raises awareness of the common issues people face throughout academia through various campaigns, talks, and initiatives. She's also the author of the #academic mental health poster series on Twitter, which is actually where I found her originally. So Zoë, I am super excited and super pleased to have you on Grad Chat to chat about your experiences.
Hello, yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm super excited to be here today.
Absolutely. So just to get everyone on the same page to start off, why is mental health in academia so important?
Gosh, that's a big question. So I guess there are several ways that you could probably think about that. So one, I think, is from a societal and institutional perspective. So I think that if we think, why on earth are we part of academia in the first place, and why do we actually want to do academic research? I think for a lot of us, the reason we want to do that is kind of improving the world around us, actually making things better for everyone. And I think that comes with the research, and what we're really rubbish at is actually making it better for ourselves. So we can really kind of sometimes be seen as like, or feel like we're robots and we're going in there to do the research and to do the best work that we can do. We're like, well, we have to get as much research out as possible. And actually, we can't do that because we're not robots. And so actually, mental health is huge from a perspective of research output for research institutions, and also from a diversity perspective as well. So if people are struggling with their mental health and they're not receiving support, then ultimately they're going to leave, and the impact that they might have had will be lost. But I think for me, the most important thing is the individual perspective, right? Everyone deserves to be able to do research. Everyone has something to offer and something to bring. And I think if we're not supporting researchers with their mental health, then ultimately those people will leave research and find their value and worth elsewhere. And yeah, of course, like I'm an industry scientist, so I have found my worth elsewhere, and other people will do the same. So
yeah, absolutely. And you know, in losing a lot of diverse perspectives, you're also kind of impacting the quality of the research itself. I recently read a really interesting book about kind of the economics of diversity, which is an interesting perspective on it. But ultimately, like you said, it comes down to just the individual aspect of like, do you need extra time? Do you need an extra room? Some like simple accommodations that really can be made to improve this. And also kind of more from a systemic perspective, there's a lot of things that could be changed as well. Do you feel comfortable telling us a little bit about your own story?
Yeah, I feel like I tell a story so often now that I've kind of normalized it for myself. So really for me, my mental health really went downhill during my PhD. I think I probably was experiencing some mental ill health like during school and things like that as well, but I hadn't really identified it as mental illness. And it was really when I got to doing my graduate program that I realized that I was really, really struggling. And I started to experience daily suicidal ideation during my PhD research. And I reached an incredibly low point where I'm just glad that I found the support that I did. I managed to come back from that. And it really, really, I was going to say touched me, but it's not quite right. Like it was such a pivotal moment in my life where I realized that actually it wasn't just me experiencing some of those mental health concerns as a PhD student. I actually started realizing that there were a lot of people around me as well that were actually experiencing mental health concerns, and that actually it was more of a systemic problem within the PhD population. And so really for me, it's my experience has really been with my own personal journey, and then realizing that I wasn't alone, and going from there. So
Is that like kind of where your advocacy started?
yeah, I think I had to take a little bit of time away from it all. Like when I finished my PhD, I think it took me a little while to really kind of, you know, get better, focus on myself. So I ended up speaking to a medical professional, making sure I was getting help that way. Started antidepressants, also started therapy. So there was a period of time, maybe 2 years, where I was really working on myself and working on getting better and recovering from my PhD studies. And don't get me wrong, my PhD supervisor was fantastically supportive. Like the environment I was in was fantastically supportive. It was really just I feel like with a PhD, sometimes like it's like death by 1,000 cuts, and like there's so many things going on at one time that actually it just became overwhelming for me. So yeah, after I got better, I remember that, there's a chemistry body in the UK called the Royal Society of Chemistry, and they do an online Twitter poster competition every year. So I don't really know what inspired me, but I decided that I was going to submit a poster based on PhD mental health rather than submit a scientific poster one year. So I don't know, I plucked up the courage to create this poster, and I collected all the statistics, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to put this out there. You know, I've got 50 followers on Twitter. Like nothing is really going to, you know, it's just something that I wanted to do and something I was passionate about. And during this online Twitter competition, like the number of interactions I had was just phenomenal. And I realized that Twitter was a really great way of communicating some of the issues around graduate school and mental health. And so that really gave me the confidence to then continue to make more posters and more resources. And then really just I've built the followership organically over time. So yeah.
So what happened with the competition?
So I ended up getting like 500,000 interactions with the poster, or impressions with the poster, and I ended up getting the prize for like the community prize for like the most liked poster of the competition. And so it ended up being really elevated from like, I don't know, I remember messaging the team that had run the poster being like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to kind of like, I don't know, crowbar this online conference that's meant to be about chemistry, and I've decided to talk about mental health instead. But they were really, really supportive, and yeah, so it just gave me the confidence to then be like, okay, this is a great way of communicating with people, and people are suddenly looking at me and are interested in these things. So what can I do? And I went from making that initial poster about PhD mental health, and then started kind of breaking that down and making some more posters as I went. And I've got undergraduate posters, ones for chemical technicians, for professors now, and things like that. So I've kind of built that kind of post those posters up and talked about the issues that you might experience at different levels in academia. So
yeah, but like you said, and you know, like these posters reflect, it's really an issue that is in academia. So you know, it's really kind of you to message them and apologize, but there's nothing to really apologize for, right? Because it is part of, you know, the topic. It is part of academia. Maybe it's not as talked about, but that's why we try and like give a platform here and talk about it online. And you know, Twitter has been a really great place for these kinds of conversations to happen, since you know, oftentimes people will talk about it in Twitter, and I don't know, sometimes when you're in person and you're in the academic setting, you're constantly seeing people, you know, do talks and talk about their awards and blah, blah, blah. And you don't get to see kind of like everyone's behind the scenes, their like 17,000th PCR failure or whatever it is. And sometimes people are more willing to just kind of talk about that online because, you know, you're stuck in lab. You can't go.
Really wish that I'd been more invested in the Twitter community, like during my PhD. I think like online communities particularly are just so important for that sort of thing, like particularly if you feel you're alone, because like especially if you intersect with some different like minority groups as well. So like, you know, you might feel like you're really alone, but then because you can connect to basically the whole world that's on Twitter, you can find other individuals that you can connect with. And I really, really wish that I'd had it as more of a resource during my PhD. I think I posted like two things during my PhD on there and not really appreciated the power of Twitter. So yeah.
I think during my PhD too, that was the thing that really helped me kind of like find a purpose, is like finding an online community and place like that. And these past 2 years, obviously everyone has really learned the value of these kinds of things. But hopefully we can continue to do that even as time goes on and as more and more of these online communities are being formed, not just for mental health, but also for people who've been historically marginalized in science, or communities that might just be a little bit smaller in science, things like that. Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever had to deal with any like resistance against your posters or your campaigns or anything like that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really didn't, or I guess I underestimated quite a lot, was as soon as you start getting a slightly bigger account on Twitter, you start to get more pushback, and like you can't communicate everything in a tweet. And sometimes, especially with me, like I'll just tweet something that I'm thinking about. So I don't put a lot of like time and effort in kind of like carefully curating my feed. I'm just kind of like, well, this is the thing that I thought about, so I'm going to put that out there. And sometimes like I get things wrong. Sometimes people will push back from things that I say and like, try and learn from these things. Then sometimes people can just be cruel. And the human brain is so good at remembering like the bad things. Like I feel like it takes like 100 things that are positive for me to counteract the negative. But again, I guess with anything where you're online, you're on social media, it's like you can step back. It's not the world, like that little kind of bubble that you're in with your phone. Like you can just step away from that, and you don't have to respond to everything. And I've got so much more protective of my space in general. So like if someone's rude to me online or anything like that, I'm just like, okay, I'm going to block this person. And for a long time, I thought that actually it was important to keep people around that had different perspectives. And I've realized recently that bigotry is not a perspective that I'm interested in.
Like between like different perspectives and just like trolls online.
Yeah, so like yes, like I'm sure there are people out there that have different opinions to me that I can learn from, but some people, like I believe that everyone should be in the research space, and that's something that I really do strongly believe in. And so yeah, I'm not going to go following accounts that are advocating for less space, not more. So
yeah, absolutely, that totally makes sense. You mentioned kind of like as you were going through a really rough time doing your PhD, finding a support and then taking time afterwards. Can you touch a little bit on like what kind of forms that support took? You mentioned like online communities being one of them, and that's a really big one. What other forms did they take?
Yeah, so I'm so thankful for my friends and family. I think that especially my husband was really there for me when I was struggling. And yeah, I really don't know if I would be here if it hadn't been for him. Like he was just really, really supportive. I also found just so much support in some of my colleagues, and the kind of stat that gets floated around of like 1 in 2 PhD students experiencing a mood disorder like anxiety and depression. Like I found that there were a lot of people around me that were experiencing similar things, and we weren't necessarily talking about them to start with. And then we started talking about them, and actually again we connected, and I think a lot of my experience was improved by connection with people. So yeah,
people always are a really good motivator for sure. I think like in terms of kind of like maybe what people could take out of this conversation, what kind of things do you think are like actionable items if someone is feeling like really in a bad place with their mental health, but they're still going through their PhD? What kind of things would you recommend?
So one of the things is like I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but like I always like found that there's like 1 or 2 professors that were teaching me like some of my courses where they seemed really approachable. And I definitely did take a risk of being like, I'm going to go speak to this person, like I've met them 3 times and they've taught me this thing, but I need to speak to someone. So I went to speak to them, and I think just finding someone who's an ally in your space and just being like, I'm struggling and I need some help. I mean, it can be hard because you have to admit to yourself that you're struggling in the first place, and also that you deserve help. And sometimes when we're really struggling with depression, we can think that we don't deserve help. And that is our brains lying to us. And everyone deserves help. And I think if there's one thing that I can get across today, it's that if you are struggling, even if you look around the room and think, well, that person's got it worse, well, you deserve as much help as anyone else. And so find someone in the space that you can speak to. Also, we can be incredibly afraid of ringing up support lines and stuff, but sometimes if we don't know exactly where to start, ringing a support line can be really helpful, just to put some words to how you're feeling. It doesn't have to, it's not going to solve all of the problems right there and then, but maybe just having that conversation is something that you can start to do.
For people who are maybe currently still in their PhD and maybe facing some type of resistance, whether that's in the form of an unsupportive PI or environment, or just the department culture in general, how do you think would be the best way to approach kind of dealing with resistance like that? That's kind of looking at a person at that moment of in your PhD or in your postdoc or while you're in academia.
So it's a really difficult question because it kind of depends on the exact situation. I like to think that there's reporting routes for really awful behavior that we might be subjected to, but sometimes there's also a power dynamic there, right? And it can be quite hard for us to come forward and say something. I guess one thing I would say that I feel like is the elephant in the room when I often have these conversations is, as much as it is painful, sometimes you can quit things. And you can leave. If the environment that you're in is so toxic that you are literally struggling with your mental health and it's getting too much, there is no failure in walking away from something. And I think it doesn't get said often enough. And for me now, in the position that I'm in, where I recruit people, I'm looking at CVs, but I'm not looking and being oh my gosh, that person didn't complete their PhD. I'm okay, well, they did X number of years of a PhD, they got that experience. And I think with employability, we can again be really afraid that we wouldn't be competitive if we walk away. But the chances are, if you want to do a PhD, you'll find another PhD position, and then you'll know what you're looking for in terms of the environment you want to work in. You might then be able to ask better questions to a potential PI, for example. And I'm not saying that you should know what questions to ask in the first place. I mean, I didn't know what to ask when I started my PhD, but having learned, maybe you would know what you were looking for. I just think it's an option to walk away, and we have to have that conversation. Otherwise, you don't have to persevere through awful things. It's not, if it's not okay, it's not okay. And I promise you there are other places where you can do a PhD and you can thrive. So I
think we all inherently know that every human has a different type and kind of knowledge in them. We're all good at different things, we know different things, but then somehow when you're in academia, there's this concept of you're a failure if you walked away, or you're not good enough, even though what's likely the truth is just that your set of skills is different, and maybe the environment isn't good enough, or maybe you're just having a particularly hard time. It's not the money they give you is particularly good enough to support having a regular lifestyle on top of having a really intense job at the same time. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, and especially when you look into people who've come from more privileged backgrounds versus not, there's a huge difference in how you're able to cope with all the stresses, and you said, the 1,000 cuts of just things happening over and over and over again. Yeah, absolutely. Can you I saw that you were doing a little bit of work also with Voices of Academia. Can you tell us a little bit about first what that is, and then what exactly you're doing there?
Yeah, so Voices of Academia is a international collaborative project. So I remember we started the project. It was a Twitter interaction where Dr. Marissa Kate, who I run the blog with, so it's a blog, I should put it is a blog, so it captures the experience of different people in academia and their mental health experiences. And I was thinking about setting up a blog, and I think Marissa had also tweeted about setting up a blog, and we're why don't we collaborate? There is no point in us setting up the exact same thing. And so she's in Australia, I'm in the UK. We also now have Emily, Sarita and Daniel as well as part of the team. So they're all volunteers helping us do social media and also doing a podcast as well now. So we've branched out into a podcast. But the real aim of the project is to capture the nuance of the mental health experiences that people have in academia. So like we can so often hear these statistics, so like, 1 in 2 PhD students are going to experience depression or anxiety or things like that. And it's like, okay, but what does that look like for a person? Like, what is that experience? Or like experiencing imposter syndrome. Well, I mean, we've had blogs where someone's talked about having imposter syndrome as a woman of color, and someone's talked about having an imposter syndrome because they didn't have any role models, and like very different perspectives, but all coming back to imposter syndrome. But if you just saw a statistic, you wouldn't get that information out. So it's been a really nice way to kind of capture those experiences that often get lost, and also give people the voice to actually talk about their own experiences. And I know that there's been situations where it's been quite cathartic for people to actually write about their experiences as well. So yeah.
Been like any blog posts or stories that were particularly kind of like surprising or really emotional, or that you like read and were like, whoa, I'm so glad I've made this blog specifically for this story to exist here?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to pick out one individual story. But yeah, there's been so many. There's been a couple of anonymous ones as well, particularly where like there was one where they were talking about suicide and suicidal ideation, and it's a heavy topic, but again, like it's something that we don't talk about as much as I guess because of the stigma around it. And also there was one anonymous blog on bullying in the department as well, and again, not many people feel confident enough to put their name to that sort of thing, but we give space for people to submit anonymous blogs as well. So again, we're capturing that information and those stories so that people can relate to those things and realize that they aren't alone, and that they aren't isolated incidents of like bullying and harassment and things like that. So yeah, we're just capturing the real things that are happening on the ground, and I think it's really important. So
yeah. And what's the response been like? Have you guys gotten any like, oh, I relate to this, or you mentioned like having 500,000 Twitter impressions with that tweet a little while back, such like, I don't know, idea of the audience and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, from like a personal response perspective, like we literally got a response the other day from someone who'd sent a message through saying, oh my goodness, I related to this blog so much, I'm actually going to go seek some help. And so you realize that there are people actually reading these things and walking away from them and taking something from them. And so yeah, it's been really great to see. And also then we pass that feedback on to the authors as well. So again, that gives them a boost. And there's also been a few individuals that have blogged for us that have then gone on and continued to do their own mental health advocacy work within the academic space as well. And it's really great to see those individuals go on and do that work. And I guess just like with my poster with the Royal Society of Chemistry, it's like almost giving people the confidence to be like, okay, I can talk about this and I'm going to now take up some space. So it's quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am really glad that people are able to kind of reach out and do that. I feel like whenever I've created a piece of content, someone reaches out saying that it's impacted them, that just like makes my whole week. I'm like, oh yes, it's reached at least one person who like felt so strongly about this. Especially, with things that are making like such a positive impact on people's lives, or, especially in situations where you're feeling so alone. And it's very easy to feel that way in academia when you're like, sitting in lab until 2 a.m. by yourself. It's not quite, sometimes it's very collaborative, but at times it's very lonely. But yeah, so before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to mention or talk about?
I should have maybe prepared something. I don't know. I guess like if you're looking to find my work, you can find me at Zoë Ayres on Twitter. I guess one exciting thing is that I'm working on a book at the moment.
So writing your own book?
Yeah. So I'm working on managing your mental health during your PhD. And so I am 50,000 words in of that book. So the first draft is nearly done, and I'm hoping that it's going to be out next year. I have a book deal, so yeah, I'm hoping that I can write some words of wisdom down on a page, and get that out there. But also I think for me the most important thing is I don't want to create a book where it's like, we're just repeating the same information that we get from our institution. So like, practice better self-care. I want to be able to acknowledge the institutional issues as well that are out there, and be like, systemic racism is a thing and that affects people, and being a woman in science is difficult for these reasons, and that could impact your mental health. So yeah, I'm really excited to be writing it because I think it's something that I would have wanted to have. So yeah, I'm hoping that it's going to be good. So we'll see.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote that I read recently about it is no badge of success to be well adjusted to an unfair or like an inequitable and unethical society. And I was like, whoa, that really hit hard.
Really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be well adjusted to an unethical society. I'm like, whoa, yeah, it's and it's weird that we like, walk around being like, oh yeah, I'm so successful because I was able to work like 16 hours. Like, no, I did that for a summer and it was terrible. I hope I never have to again. But yeah, so that sounds super awesome. We'll keep an eye out for it. Listeners, all of our links and ads and things to follow us at will be down in the description or in the information box, depending on where you're seeing this. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been Grad Chat by PhD Balance. Grad Chat episodes are now posted simultaneously on our podcast and also on our YouTube channel Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information about Grad Chat or PhD Balance, you can check out our website or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at PhD_Balance. You can follow me at Notes by Neva on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And until then, I'll see you on the next page.